Hello there, everybody. My name is Josh Hoover with Benefit Technology Resources, and I'm here today with Tim Clark from Proliant. Proliant is one of our payroll HCM vendor partners that we worked with for several years. Tim and I worked together for like 6 years, something like that. And we wanted to get together, like we've talked about with some other videos, get with the sponsors that were sponsoring the BTR Summit, the live summit in person that we've had to postpone because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But we're moving it to a virtual event, and as part of our summer initiative, we wanted to get with each vendor to talk about just what they're seeing in the market these days and how things are going. But before we dive into some of those questions, I'd like Tim, if you would introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, Josh. Thanks for having me. My name is Tim Clark. I am the National Enterprise Sales Manager for Proliant. I've been with Proliant for a little over 12 years, actually. In the industry for a few years longer than that. But from enterprise, I think a lot of times that the title gets a connotation of specifically working with larger employee count groups, which actually really isn't the case with us. Enterprise for me means I do a lot with channel partners. So I do a lot with broker relationships, with just other channel partners. So ultimately, at the end of the day, with working with them and their clients, if it's important to them, it's important to me, whether it's one employee or 1,000 employees. It doesn't make any difference to us.
Excellent. Well, that's helpful. So in this kind of new world, this changing world that we live in right now, how is Proliant innovating right now? What does that look like?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think everybody in our space has been had to be a little bit nimble because obviously access to information has been more critical than ever. But I think what we've been doing as an organization, and I'm sure this is going to be similar to some of our competitors in this space as well, is, really being able to develop tools for a better at-home workforce, because that's everything shifted there. A lot of people had already done kind of a mix, half and half, in office, at home. So systems are already kind of leaning more towards employees being able to access it on a smartphone, through a tablet, and having that self-service to access it anywhere, but really making sure that everything they need is available to them, even internal communication, so enhancing communication tools. But I think the biggest piece of innovation really falls along with compliance. And making sure that as Washington is changing what their requirements are, in the initial part of our coronavirus days, it was almost daily of what they were asking for and what it was going to look for with regards to reporting. So SBA loans, PPP loans, being able to accurately track FMLA, sick leave, and as you're, unfortunately having to furlough employee counts, communication, what does that look like? So really just being able to innovate and create additional tools to make that whole process easier for the payroll and HR administrators, because obviously they're getting forced in a direction where they're going to have to make quick decisions about employee work counts and their workforce, and being able to, from a compliance perspective, make sure that their T's are crossed and I's are dotted, and they have all the data they need. And some of the bigger things that are moving now, outside of obviously just the loans and getting that, all of that reporting stems directly from payroll. So accurately being able to get those reports in the format that our clients need to file. Also assisting them with employee retention tax credits, because that's also a big part of it. Mm-hmm. So really, I think the innovation really stems itself or surrounds compliance primarily.
So I think you're spot on as far as the compliance component, but let's dive in a little bit deeper on the communication, because this is something that we're getting asked about all the time. So what kind of communication tools have you guys rolled out that employers have really jumped on and been able to leverage with their employees while they're, distributed over a lot of different workplaces rather than just the office?
Well, I don't necessarily think it was creating new tools for them to use. The tools were there. What we found primarily is a lot of our clients weren't really using them, and they didn't necessarily know how to use them to their full capacity. So really enforcing the fact that all of their employees, had the mobile app. and everybody was in self-service. A mobile app for us follows self-service. So you're on self-service, you've got the mobile app. So being able to, we've got notification engine that lives within there. So being able to really let them know how they can distribute messaging to their employees, how they can distribute documentation. A lot of it came down to putting out information with, okay, well, this is what benefit information looks like. That's always getting distributed through an admin system, but also documentation for them to acknowledge. Please acknowledge that we don't want you coming back in. And if you do come in, there's going to be temperature testing. There's going to be all of these different things. So you're getting an employee acknowledgement, but making sure that that communication is going via push notification to the app, plus a text, plus an email. And it was actually, it was interesting to us because these tools, we figured that our clients were utilizing them to their fullest capacity, but they really weren't. So they were really reaching out to their support staff and saying, hey, I know we have this, but I really haven't configured it. I don't know the best way to use it. Can you train me up on this? And so that's really what we found, is just really going back over the tools that they already had at their disposal to make sure that they were using it to reach out to now their employee population that's not in front of them anymore.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that we see quite a bit. I found it interesting when the pandemic and the shelter in places started. A lot of employers and brokers were asking us these questions, like, oh, how do we communicate with our employees? Well, drop something in your employee self-service portal, right? Because it's already there. The client already has it. So, yeah, I think that's that's a really good point. So So as we kind of move away from the shelter in place and hopefully are moving on from the pandemic world, what do you expect to see in our industry over the next 12, 24 months?
Actually, I think what this has done is you can kind of assimilate it if you look back to the recession in 2008 and 2009, right? So I think a lot of HRIS and HR systems have really grown and gotten very, very wide with employee engagement tools, with all kinds of different messaging, any component that you can put onto an employee. What I think this has done, like in the recession, is a lot of those things have very much taken a backseat, and it has come back down to, okay, compliance, which is revolving around payroll, reporting, onboarding, and an ACA, really. ACA has already been in place, obviously, for 4 or 5 years. We already know that, but it falls under the compliance column, because people are looking for all of that information from reporting. They're really leaning on their partner, and I think that's a big piece of this. What's come out of this is people are really leaning on their payroll provider. And I'm not saying HRIS provider, but it is payroll because of this reporting requirement. So people are expecting more information. They're looking to them as an adversarial partner, and they want to be able to have them say, okay, are you doing a webinar? What's happened this week? What's disseminated down from Washington? What's changed? Because as we saw the first, 6-8 weeks, it changed every single week, if not daily. So having a synopsis and being able to help them understand as business owners what that looked like and how can you help me get that information out of your system. So I think a lot of these systems and how they're being used have shifted back. Again, I saw it in the recession where it went back to all of these HR components went away. It went back down to just cost-effective payroll compliance. This isn't quite to that scale, but it's along those lines. And a lot of those different big HR pieces are kind of getting put on the back burner again. So I think in the industry, I'm curious to see, I think the bigger players will survive, as I always do. I'm curious to see how some of the licensees or the providers that use the licensed software, what that looks like, because a big piece of all of this is reaction time, quick reaction time to be able to make sure that you can develop and deploy those tools for reporting, for tracking sick leave, FMLA, all of these things, and have those different pieces in place. And so, and don't take that as I'm picking on licensees, because that's not what I meant, but it's just more of,
Sure.
I'm curious to see that some people that don't have a direct finger on what's being developed, how they're able to really have access to those tools to make sure that their clients are using them. So I think kind of collecting that information, that's going to be interesting to see. So just as far as really kind of the tools that most people are deploying in our space, making sure from like onboarding, how that shifted with, social distancing, and you're not checking in somebody's, passport, or what that looks like to when you're actually finishing the onboarding process. There's been some modification with that process. Payroll, like I had said, tracking FMLA, sick leave, reporting, time and labor. I think there's going to be, if there's a big shift to at work or at home workforce, which we'll see, I think a lot of time, a lot of job costing is going to be put in place, because it's the out of sight, out of mind. Employers are going to want to know ultimately what people are working on, so that they can really, unfortunately, and maybe a little bit over management, but I think you're going to see a lot more of deploying some job costing tools in there. I think applicant tracking is going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. You've been at a lot of different HR conventions and conferences, and there's always a lot of new recruiting and applicant tracking tools. With people not hiring that much right now, I want to see really what that looks like, and I don't know what that will look like. Obviously, again, the bigger players, the better players, they're not going anywhere. But really, how the masses kind of conform to that, and what those different services, what they present. But honestly, I think overall, what we're going to see is automation. So integrations, enhancement of integrations with back office systems, with ERP systems, for general ledgers, and everything else. I think being able to streamline and get back to basics, and streamline efficiencies, integrations with already existing platforms that are outside of the payroll HRIS scope, how people can integrate with that to make sure that businesses are really running pretty lean. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And we see it a lot now, but it's going to be not a nice to have. It's going to be a requirement. You're going to have to be pretty nimble and be able to integrate better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, like the very beginning there, when you're talking about the potential consolidation of resources within an employer, but also while at the same time they need more robust communication tools. If they don't have a benefits enrollment tool, they're going to need that. So there'll be consolidation in some areas and contraction in some areas and expansion in others. So it'll be definitely interesting to see how that plays out. So my last question for you, in 1 minute or less, what is something that you've learned over the last few months that you want to share that would be helpful to this audience?
I think the biggest key pieces that we've taken away from this are reaction time and collaboration. We have been collaborating with more partners than we ever have before, and different partners, not just our broker partners, labor attorneys, bankers. We're all kind of in this together. So, we've been doing weekly webinars for our clients, and we're bringing those partners in. And before we have those webinars, the roundtable discussions we're having with ERISA attorneys, labor law attorneys, because there's been so much gray area of like, okay, if I have to do this to my workforce, what am I exposing myself to as a business owner? So the collaboration has been key. We've really formed much stronger alliances with partners than we had before, and strengthened those that were existing. So it's been nice for us to all kind of get around the table and collaborate and talk more. But also, once that has been cleared and identified, how quickly can you develop it, deploy it, make sure it checks all those boxes, and get it into our clients' hands? So being nimble has been something that has been extremely important, to be able to react and get our clients what they need at a moment's notice.
And I think that's huge because, like you said, things are changing. You said weekly, but I would even argue maybe even daily, particularly as this all started. And being able to aggregate those resources, that's such a vital component to everything that's going on. So, yeah. Well, Tim, thank you so much. We appreciate you joining us today. And there's my alarm telling us it's time to wrap up, I guess. So thank you for joining us today. And we'll be sure to link Proliant's website on here on the video, probably somewhere down there. I don't know. So Tim Clark from Proliant, have a great day, and we'll talk to everyone soon.
Thanks so much, Josh. I appreciate the time.